People often ask me how I became a banking and finance attorney and what exactly a banking and finance attorney does. So that's what I'm going to be chatting about in today's video. Hi, I'm Tasha with One Big Happy Life, and we help you find balance, build wealth, and live happy. Everything that you need to create the life that you want. So a couple of weeks ago on Instagram, I decided to do a poll to see how many people actually knew that was aware that I'm a banking and consumer finance attorney. And it turned out that most people didn't. I was really surprised at the number of people that had no idea what it is that I did for a living, that I was a banking and consumer finance attorney. But even still, I also got questions from people about what exactly is a banking and consumer finance attorney and what does that look like and how did I become one? So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I also think that it's really important to know who it is and the background of the person that you're taking financial advice from, because financial advice has long-term implications both for your life and any generations that follow you if you decide to have kids. And it can be a long time before you see the impact of the decisions that you make based on advice that you get from someone. It can be a long time before you see that manifest in your finances for good or for bad. So I think it's really important always to consider the source that you're getting information from whenever you're thinking of incorporating that information into your finances. So having said that, I wanted to start off by talking about how I became a banking and consumer finance attorney, like what led me to this path, because I don't think that it's something that anyone sits there and says when they're a kid. Like, you might think you want to be a lawyer, but you always imagine yourself like Perry Mason or Law and Order, like a DA or something prosecuting someone. You never imagine yourself, regulating banks as a thing that you do for a living. And I know I didn't see myself doing that either. But when I think back on my life, especially when I was a kid and thinking about, well, what was I good at? A lot of people will think, oh, well, arguing, you should be a lawyer. But I've always been really good at reading, at writing, and at math. I loved math and logic puzzles and word puzzles and all of that stuff. But somehow when I started my undergrad career, I thought I was going to be a nurse because I had it in my mind that I was going to be a doctor. And thankfully, I decided to become a lawyer instead. And so I switched from a nursing major to an economics major. And when I did that, that's when I really started to take finance heavy classes. So I took personal finance class for the first time. And that's how I learned about the time value of money. And, I took Econ 101 and 102 and, macro and micro econ, money and banking. So that's where I learned about how our banking system works. I still don't love money and banking, but at least I know how it works because of that. Also, when I was in undergrad, I worked in the Veterans Affairs office. So I learned all about veterans benefits, but also college financial aid. So that's when, looking back on it now, clearly I've always been interested in consumer financial products, even from my own perspective, because by the time I graduated from college, I had actually owned 2 homes and almost refinanced a house and was almost debated and switched into a predatory mortgage. And the only reason that didn't happen was because I just happened to read all of that crazy jargon and understood that they were trying to move me out of my fixed rate mortgage and into an adjustable rate mortgage. And it's because of those personal experiences combined with real world learning in college and also work experience in college in the financial aid office that by the time I went to law school, I decided that I wanted to be a part of both the mortgage foreclosure foreclosure clinic, but also the family law clinic. So in the mortgage foreclosure clinic, I got exposure to working with homeowners who were in the midst of mediation with banks to try to negotiate a workout so that they could keep their mortgages. And then on the family law side, because I was dealing with divorces, I learned how to deal with family finance and calculating child support and the tax implications of divorce. So, I'm just telling you guys all of these things so that you can understand the path that I took and how I've gained the knowledge at this point now, almost 2 decades worth of consumer finance knowledge that I distill and share here with you in One Big Happy Life. So then after law school, I went and started working for a bank regulator, investigating Fair Housing Act discrimination cases. And because I was a trained attorney, I would get the most complex fair housing cases, which were fair lending cases, where people would allege that a bank had treated them less favorably because they were a member of a protected class. I investigated these types of cases for 3 years, and then I became a branch chief. So I was in charge of a 5-state region and had a staff under me whose responsibility it was to investigate these cases. And so I got a really interesting look at personal finance and consumer finance because on the one hand, I had the complainants who were regular people just like me and you trying to understand what is going on with their finances, with their loans, and not understanding why things weren't working out the way that they were expecting them to. But then it also required me to understand the inner workings of the bank and the inner workings of the financial products themselves, because I had to understand that stuff in order to tell if the financial product was set up right, if all of the disclosures were given, and if the person who filed the complaint was actually treated according to the bank's policies. And so if the bank was not following its policies, then we had conversations about, well, why or why not. I did that for almost a year. I was a branch chief over that 5-state region. And then Joseph got an opportunity to transfer to the Washington, D.C. area, and my job wouldn't transfer. So that's when I left the federal regulator and moved over to a private law firm doing banking compliance work. So what that meant was that I was outside counsel for banks, helping to make sure that they were complying with all the various consumer finance regulations. And again, this required me to get just really in-depth knowledge and understanding of the way that banks work, the way that financial products work, and the way that credit modeling works. Because I had to understand everything about the bank so that I could see where there were any potential risks, if they were inadvertently violating any federal regulations so that we could fix it and then report it to the federal regulators in advance before they found it. So then the bank wouldn't be seen as a bad actor. So after working as outside counsel for banks, I then switched back over to federal regulation, but this time regulating community banks. And what's really interesting about community banks is that they're much smaller. They have a much closer relationship with the people that they serve, but they're also more likely to do, less than vanilla loans. Like bigger banks, their loans they like to stay within certain parameters because it's just much safer for them to stay in compliance. And it's also easier for them to churn out the volume of loans that they have to churn out. At the community banks, these are like relationship-based banking. And so there was a lot of variety in the loans and the loan structures. So I got exposed to really unusual loan structures. After I had Reeves in 2016, I decided that I wanted to step away from private practice and go back to being a regulator so that I could have regular hours in my job. Like I just wanted to work a 40-hour week and I didn't want to have to work about billing my time. So I ended up switching back to being a federal regulator, which meant that instead of working for the banks, helping them comply, I was now working for the federal government examining banks to see whether or not they were in compliance. And so I really like that I've been able to see consumer finance and banking from so many different avenues. Obviously, from a personal perspective and just navigating life as a human in the world that we live in that's so filled with like laws and numbers when it comes to anything that we're trying to do with our finances, but also working for banks and working on banks just to really see how all of this stuff, plays together, like comes together, but also in working for federal regulators, I also looked at how all of the things that we're doing, all of our laws interact to protect people all across the country and issues that are facing people with their finances all across the country, because the goal of any federal regulator is to make sure that people are protected. So that is like a little bit more about, probably a lot more than you probably ever wanted to know about how I became a banking and finance attorney. I love consumer finance and personal finance. I've dedicated my entire life, my entire career to helping people with money in one way or another. And I'm so excited that I get to do it here inside of One Big Happy Life, completely on my own terms, and where I get to really see the impact of the work that I'm doing. I mean, I've always known that the work that I was doing was having an impact on the world, making the world a better place, making it easier for people to understand the financial transactions that they're getting into, and making sure that those financial transactions are as fair as they could possibly be. But it's just really nice here at One Big Happy Life to spread the knowledge that I have gained over the course of the past, 18 years now here with you guys. The other thing is, I think a lot of people think that when you're an attorney, it means that you're always in court. And the truth is, I was never in court. The only time I've ever gone to court is when I was doing family law. And so I went to court, to help finalize divorces, but never on the banking side. It was always more of a compliance kind of role. So that's, first of all, trying to prevent on the banking side, trying to prevent any kind of legal issue where they would end up having to go to court. But then as the regulator, looking at what was going on, gathering the evidence, and then if there was a charge, I was not the attorney that was going to take it to court. We had other attorneys who did that. And I also did, towards the end of my legal career, because obviously I'm not practicing now, I did a lot of policy work, which meant that I spent a lot of time looking at what was happening in the world as a result of, or in the country, as a result of the different types of loan products that were available and the current laws and policies that we had in place, to look for ways in which we could improve the protections that were available to people, but also look for potential warning signs, like issues with certain financial products, like if it looks like it could cause harm to consumers in ways that we hadn't anticipated before those products existed. So that was part of my job, being proactive and looking for ways that we could protect people. So I hope that this video was helpful, just giving you a little bit more about my finance background, what I did for a living before I went all in into working full-time here at One Big Happy Life and running this company full-time. So let me know what questions you guys have for me about what I did as a banking and finance attorney, or basically anything. Drop me a comment down below and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.